Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The Cairo believed they were gods, not the kind who wore flowing robes and spoke in riddles, but gods in the truest sense. They had power over the universe itself, manipulating the laws of physics at will. Time, space, gravity, these were mere tools to them, as natural as breathing to humans. And like gods, they had long ago ceased seeing lesser creatures, such as humans, as anything more than playthings. Dr. Elaine Carter knew this well. She had witnessed it firsthand. She'd seen her team tortured and broken, their bodies used as experiments to satisfy the Cairo's cruel curiosity. They wanted to see how far they could push humanity before they snapped, before mind and body were shattered beyond repair. And all the while, the Cairo stood in their impossible majesty, looking down with their glowing eyes, as if they were so far removed from the suffering they inflicted that it barely registered. To them, the humans were insects, and Elaine, one of many bugs trapped in a jar. But Elaine wasn't like the others. She wasn't going to break. She couldn't afford to. Again, a cold voice soared from behind her. Elaine's muscles screamed in protest as the gravity field increased again. The weight of a small planet pressed against her bones, forcing her to her knees. Her vision blurred as the edges of her mind flirted with blackness, but she didn't let it take her. Gritting her teeth, she forced herself to stand, inch by inch, her legs quivering as though they might give way at any moment. The overseer, Sorrel, watched with mild interest. His shimmering silver skin reflected the harsh light of the chamber, his elongated body wrapped in regal robes. He floated effortlessly, unaffected by the same force that was attempting to crush Elaine into the ground. His sharp, angular face wore a hint of amusement as he leaned in closer. "You humans are so fragile," Sorrel mused, tilting his head. "Why do you resist the inevitable?" Elaine didn't answer. She had stopped wasting breath on the Cairo long ago. Every word was twisted into their narrative of superiority, every defiant act another reason for them to mock the inferiority of humankind. Instead, she focused on her breathing. Slow, steady. She felt the weight crushing her chest, making every inhale feel like swallowing a mountain. But she didn't give in. She couldn't give in. Somewhere, deep within her, something stirred. And that something terrified Sorrel. For the first time in his life, a small spark of doubt flickered in the back of his mind as he watched her defy the force of the universe itself. Elaine was a curiosity, not because she was physically stronger than the others, but because of her mind. There was something about her will unyielding, unbreakably, that unsettled him. "Enough," he said, waving his hand. The crushing weight vanished, and Elaine fell forward, collapsing to her hands and knees, gasping for air. Her vision swam, her limbs trembling uncontrollably, but she refused to stay down. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself upright once more, glaring at Sorrel with a fury that burned brighter than any star. "You think your will can change the fabric of reality?" Sorrel asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are nothing, human. A fleeting spark in the vastness of time. Your kind is bound by flesh, by the limits of biology. We, the Cairo, have transcended such petty constraints." Elaine didn't respond. She couldn't afford to, not yet. She knew that to reveal her hand too soon would mean certain death for her and her team. Instead, she allowed him to think he had broken her, let him believe that her silence was submission. When Sorrel left the chamber, gliding out like some ethereal wraith, Elaine collapsed fully, her body spent. She heard footsteps rushing toward her, felt the rough hands of her team lifting her gently. "You did it," whispered Lucas, one of her top engineers. His voice was hushed, trembling with awe. "You actually stood up to that force." "No one's done that before." Elaine shook her head, struggling to find her voice. "Not a broken bar enough," she rasped. "We need more." "We're running out of time," Lucas replied, glancing toward the chamber doors nervously. "If we don't act soon, we'll all end up dead or worse." Elaine looked up at him, her vision clearing. There was determination in her eye as a steel forged in the fires of despair. "Not yet," she said softly. "We're close. We just need to push further." The experiments continued for days, weeks. The Chiron grew more frustrated as Elaine and her team refused to break. Each session was worse than the last, tortures designed to cripple the human body, tests to push them beyond their limits. But Elaine didn't falter. Through sheer force of will, she pushed herself and her team to survive. It wasn't just about survival, though. Elaine had started to notice something. Each time they were subjected to the Chiron's tortures, something in her mind shifted. She could feel it in the way her thoughts sharpened, the way her reflexes quickened, the way she could predict movements, manipulate her surroundings even if only subtly. She knew the Chiron noticed too. But they didn't understand what was happening. They thought humans were weak, incapable of true evolution. They were wrong. Late one night, in the darkness of their cell, Elaine gathered her team. There were 6 of them now, survivors of the experiments, all loyal to her, all following her lead without question. They had been through hell together, and now, they were ready to fight back. "We've been training our bodies," Elaine said, her voice a low whisper. "But it's our minds they fear. The Chiron think they've surpassed us because they can manipulate the universe's laws. But we've seen their weakness. They can't do it without their technology. It's not inherent, it's learned." Lucas frowned. "But even if we know that, what can we do? We don't have access to their tech." Elaine smiled. It was a cold, calculated smile, the kind that hinted at something dangerous lurking beneath. "We don't need their tech. We've been pushing the limits of our bodies for weeks. Now, it's time to push the limits of our minds." They trained in secret, using the techniques Elaine had discovered: meditation, focus, willpower. At first, it seemed impossible. The Chiron had convinced them that humans were weak, limited. But as they practiced, they began to notice changes, subtle, but undeniable. It started small. Lucas found he could manipulate the temperature of his surroundings, raising or lowering it with just a thought. Another member of the team, Sarah, could slow her heart rate to almost nothing, allowing her to survive on minimal oxygen in high-stress environments. They were pushing the boundaries of what the Chiron believed humans capable of. And it was only the beginning. Elaine herself experienced something even more profound. During one of their secret training sessions, she had an epiphany. She was able to perceive the flow of time not just as a linear progression, but as something malleable. Something she could stretch and bend. She could see into the spaces between seconds, manipulating her perception to move faster than any of the Chiron could anticipate. It was exhilarating and terrifying. "We're changing," Sarah whispered one night after a particularly intense session. "We're becoming something else, something a broken bar more." Elaine nodded. "And the Chiron don't know it." "Not yet." That was the key. The Chiron had no idea what was happening. They had assumed that any human evolution would be physical, something they could measure and quantify. But this was different. This was mental, spiritual. The Chiron had no frame of reference for it. The plan was simple, but dangerous. They would wait for the next round of experiments, pretend to submit, and then use their newfound abilities to strike back. They didn't have to defeat the entire Chiron Empire, just Sorrel, just the overseer who controlled the facility. As the next test approached, Elaine and her team steeled themselves. There was no turning back now. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment when they would show the Chiron just how wrong they had been. Sorrel entered the chamber, flanked by 2 Chiron guards. His expression was one of mild disinterest as he prepared the next experiment. He didn't even bother to look at Elaine. Big mistake. Elaine moved before he could react, her body a blur as she crossed the room in the space between seconds. Time seemed to slow around her as she lashed out, her fist connecting with Sorrel's face in a move so fast, he didn't even have time to blink. Elaine's fist connected with Sorrel's face, and for the first time since she had met the Chiron overseer, she saw something like surprise flash in his glowing eyes. His body, normally so ethereal and graceful, staggered back from the force of her blow, and a crackling sound filled the chamber as the laws of physics spent around them. The two Cairo guards moved to intervene, but Elaine was already on them. She didn't have time to think, only to act. Her mind raced at an impossible speed. Her perception of time stretched as if each second had been slowed to a crawl. She could see the faint ripples in the air as the Cairo guards reached for their weapons, could feel the subtle shifts in gravity as they attempted to trap her with their manipulation of space. But it didn't matter. She was faster. In a single fluid motion, she spun toward the first guard, her hand slicing through the air and knocking his weapon aside before it could fully materialize. She could feel the energy surging through her body, could sense the way her will was bending the laws of the universe around her. The Cairo had underestimated the power of the human mind, and now they were paying the price. The second guard moved in, his glowing eyes narrowing as he attempted to focus his control over gravity to pin her down. But Elaine had already anticipated his move. She ducked low, the crushing force of gravity grazing her as she pivoted around him, her legs sweeping out in a sharp arc. The guard's feet were knocked out from under him, and before he could react, Elaine was on him, her fist driving into his side with a force that sent him flying across the room. Sorrel, regaining his composure, raised a hand, and Elaine felt the air around her grow thick as if the very fabric of space itself was being compressed. Her vision wavered, and for a brief moment, she could feel the Cairo's immense power pressing in on her, trying to smother her mind, to break her will. But Elaine wasn't going to break. Not now, not ever. With a fierce cry, she pushed back against the crushing weight of space, her mind reaching out, bending the laws of reality to her will. The pressure around her shattered, and the room seemed to ripple as she broke free from Sorrel's grip. "You," Sorrel hissed, his voice laced with disbelief. "How?" Elaine didn't answer. There was no need. She could feel the power coursing through her veins, feel the limits of her mind and body expanding with each passing second. This wasn't just evolution, it was transcendence. The Cairo had thought they had control over the universe, but they had never understood the true potential of the human will. Sorrel lunged at her, his hands crackling with energy as he attempted to tear at the fabric of space around her. Elaine met him head on, her body moving with a speed and grace that felt almost effortless. Their movements blurred together, the room distorting around them as their powers clashed. Sorrel's attacks were wild, fueled by desperation and anger, but Elaine was calm, focused. She could see every one of his moves before he made them, could feel the subtle shifts in the air as he tried to bend space to his advantage. But Elaine had already mastered those same abilities and more. With a sharp twist of her hand, she grabbed hold of the invisible threads of space and time, pulling them tight around Sorrel. He froze, his body contorting as he struggled against the invisible bonds that held him in place. His eyes burned with fury as he realized what had happened. "You a broken bar insignificant," he began, but his words were cut off as Elaine clenched her fist, and the air around him collapsed inward. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, with a sickening crack, Sorrel's body crumpled, collapsing into itself as the weight of his own power consumed him. The room fell still, the faint hum of Cairo technology the only sound that remained. Elaine stood over Sorrel's lifeless form, her breath coming in slow, measured gasps. The energy still coursed through her veins, but she could feel it ebbing, the strain of pushing her mind and body to their limits finally catching up with her. She turned to her team, who had watched the battle unfold in stunned silence. "It's over," Elaine said softly, her voice steady despite the exhaustion gnawing at her. Lucas stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "What now?" Elaine took a deep breath, surveying the chamber around her. Sorrel was dead, but they were still deep inside Cairo territory, surrounded by enemies who wouldn't hesitate to retaliate once they realized what had happened. "We finish what we started," she said, her voice hardening. "We're going to destroy this facility, and then we're going to show the Cairo that humanity isn't something they can crush under their heel." Her team nodded, and together, They moved to the control center at the heart of the facility. Elaine's mind raced as they worked, dismantling the Cairo's systems and setting the facility's self-destruct sequence. The Cairo had relied on their arrogance for too long, believing themselves invincible simply because they could control the laws of physics. But they had never accounted for the one thing they couldn't manipulate: human will. As the countdown began, Elaine felt a sense of calm settle over her. This was only the beginning. The Cairo might be powerful, but they weren't invincible. And now, they would never underestimate humanity again. The facility began to shake, the walls groaning as the self-destruct sequence reached its final stages. Elaine and her team ran through the corridors, the ground quaking beneath their feet. The Cairo guards were in disarray, their carefully controlled environment collapsing around them. For the first time, the humans had the upper hand. They burst through the outer doors just as the facility exploded behind them, a massive fireball erupting into the sky. Elaine didn't look back. There was no need. She knew the message they had sent, and she knew it wouldn't be long before the Cairo realized the full extent of their mistake. As the dust settled and the glow of the explosion faded into the distance, Elaine stood tall, her team gathered around her. They were battered and bruised, but they were Alivia and they were stronger than they had ever been before. "What now?" Lucas asked again, his voice quiet but filled with hope. Elaine glanced at him, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Now," she said, "we take this fight to the Cairo. They think they know what humans are capable of, but they haven't seen anything yet." The team nodded in agreement, their resolve unshakable. They had defied the Cairo, pushed beyond the limits of what the alien overlords believed possible. And now, they were ready to show the entire galaxy just how powerful human will truly was. Elaine took one last look at the burning wreckage of the Cairo facility behind them before turning her gaze to the stars. Somewhere out there, the Cairo were watching, waiting. But she wasn't afraid. The Cairo had their control over the universe's laws. But humans had something far greater, an unbreakable will. And in the end, that would be enough.